Hi everyone. Thank you for being here today. We'll go ahead and start to transition into the program. Food and drinks will be out the whole time, so feel free to eat and drink as we go along. Just real quickly, my name is Evangeline Coker. I'm from the Office of Research Development, and I am thrilled to invite you here and see you here today for our international roadmap, figuring out your research journey as you work with international collaborators. So today I would like to begin by inviting our special speaker, Dr. Stephen McDowell, to give a few words. Dr. McDowell is the John H. Phipps Professor in the School of Communication and serves as Assistant Provost for International Initiatives at Florida State University. He also serves as Interim Dean of the College of Communication and Information. His research and teaching interests address new content, new communication technologies, and communication policies in South Asia and North America. He has co-edited with Sahana Udupa, Media as Politics in South Asia. He is co-authored with Philip Steinberg and Tommy Tomasello, Managing the Infosphere, Governance, Technology, and Cultural Practice in Motion, and written a book on India's communication policies, globalization, liberalization, and policy change, a political economy in India's communications sector. Dr. Stephen McDowell is passionate about international research at FSU and is always looking for ways to help faculty and students increase their international presence. Dr. McDowell, it's a pleasure to welcome you today, and I'll hand it over to you.
I was wondering about the applause. You're welcome to sit down, but certainly there's some great food there. I'm just going to give a few remarks of welcome. I have enjoyed working with many of the folks that you saw on the screen here, and it's really great to have you here. And I'm very glad that the Office of Research Development has initiated this panel tonight, and we also have the Dean of Faculty Development and Advancement as well. FSU has tried to articulate our strategy for internationalization. Cindy Green applied for and was awarded probably 2017 the Senator Paul Simon Award from NAFSA, one of our big internationalization organizations. We also applied for and were awarded an APLU Campus Internationalization Grant in 2008, or not a grant, but an award in 2018. And so we had the support of the provost and academic leaders for that project. And I think Bruce was probably involved in that putting that first grant together, the NAFSA grant. And, Bruce kind of really pulled things together for the university. We are increasingly seeing the importance of international research and international collaboration in our mission. Yesterday afternoon, President McCullough stood here at this very podium and talked about the importance of international research and collaboration, and that something he's been talking about for the last year and is really trying to get behind as part of our efforts to expand research at the university. So I think this effort that's represented in the panel today will be becoming more important. You're going to hear more about it, I think, just based on what the President's been telling us. So I'm thankful for the leadership of the people on this panel and for all of you coming here, and hopefully this is the beginning of lots of good conversations about these efforts going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. All right, I'm going to try not to make too much noise as I move this. So I'll go ahead and introduce our panelists. You can go ahead and come and take a seat up on the stage with me. For our first panel, this is Research Around the World, Experiences Building International Collaborations. So yeah, feel free to take a seat. for being with us today. So we'll start with some introductions. I will start with the first professor on my left, Rabia Razouk. Rabia joined FSU in 2003 and is currently the director of the Learning Systems Institute. He has established a grant support system for one of the largest and most successful research institutes in Florida. He has helped develop more than 500 grant proposals and managed hundreds of projects at the Institute. Over the past 10 years, he has been awarded over 70 large awards grants as principal investigator. Thank you, Rabia. And then next to Rabia's left is Dr. Wei Guo. Wei Guo is an associate professor of mechanical engineering at the National High Magnetic Field Laboratory at FSU. He received his PhD in physics from Brown University in 2008. And after graduation, he worked at Yale University as a postdoc from 2008 to 2010, and as a research scientist from 2010 to 2012. He joined FSU in the summer of 2012, and his research interests include superfluid hydrodynamics, cryogenic fluid visualization, cavitation and bubble dynamics, and cryogenic particle detector research and development. I feel even smarter now that I've said all of those words. Dr. Guo has been involved in various national and international collaborations. These include his current collaboration with researchers in Japan and the UK on quantum fluid turbulence, and his involvement in nationwide collaborations on cryogenic dark matter search and hydrogen-based aviation. Thank you, Dr. Guo. And then last but not least, we have Joseph Helwig, who is an anthropologist and associate professor of religion at Florida State University. He is past president of the Mandé Studies Association and current co-editor of the Religion in Transforming Africa book series for James Curry Boydell and Brewer, as well as deputy editor of the Journal of Religion in Africa, and co-editor of Mandé Studies with Indiana University Press. He has published on and done research with initiated Dozo hunters, as well as with trans women and gay men in Côte d'Ivoire, and on Nko healers in Guinea and Mali. His books have appeared with the University of Chicago Press and L'Harmattan Paris, and his articles and chapters have appeared in multiple journals, including but not limited to, and I say that because I have opted not to say all the French journals' names for fear that I would butcher the pronunciations, but including Africa, Africa Today, the African Studies Review, Afrique Contemporaine, that's the most you get from me today, Journal of the Royal Anthropological Association as well. Thank you so much, Dr. Helwig. So I'd like to start off with a couple questions, and then I'm happy to open it up to the group. If you do have a question to ask, feel free to raise your hand and we'll make sure we notice you. But I'd like to first go down the line and ask briefly and generally what got you started with international collaborations. And so, Rabia, would you like to begin?
Yeah, so the Learning Systems Institute started about 53 years ago, and it started in the area of international education development. It actually helped South Korea to develop its own education system, and it worked on it for a couple of decades, 2-3 decades, and the Korean education system today is one of the best in the world. And that was the start of LSI, kind of doing international development, and it continued all the way to the late 90s when that crew retired and LSI became very tiny. So I joined LSI in 2003, and at the time our focus was domestic work, but we had that rich history that we weren't building on. So it was kind of our strategic direction to revive that work. So we started recruiting faculty to help us do this. And we, since then, we've had dozens of projects, and that started, I think, around 2006 or so. And today we have about 35 different grants that are last year we've had about 35 different grants that are working in international projects, totaling more than $40 million. LSI as a whole had about $65 million with 60-some projects. So that, I guess, that change that we've done in the, 15 years ago has paid off. I guess that's why I got involved in it somehow.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Dr. Guo?
Sure. First, thank you for inviting me. It's my great pleasure to be here. The reason for me to be very actively pursuing international collaboration is very natural. It's just because the type of research I'm working on. A major part of the research our group is working on is called quantum fluids or superfluid. This field is more active in Europe and Japan. So we have a lot of co-workers and researchers in Japan and in Europe. In the 70s, 80s, I think this research is very active in the United States. But in the past 2 or 3 decades, gradually, the research activity shifted to other topics. So this field becomes less and less active in the United States. But it's a still important area because the study in this field could be beneficial to the design of superconducting magnet and particle accelerators such and such. So there are still people studying it. But now there are more people, more researchers in UK, in Europe, and in Japan. They work on this type of research. So this is why, very naturally, I will seek collaboration with researchers in those other places. So even when I was at Yale, start my postdoc, I constantly go for those annual meetings in this field to make connections with the research in this field. After I joined FSU, I think one thing I did a bit special is I organized an international workshop on this research topic and invited all the well-established researchers to come over to FSU. So we really hold a workshop at FSU at MagLab in this topic field. And that really allowed me to make more strong connections with people in this field. So very naturally, we later developed all kinds of collaborative projects. So that's exactly how it goes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Joseph Helwig, and thanks again for organizing this. I guess I would trace my interest in international research to an 8th grade French class when I opened up the cover of the book and saw a map of the world with all of the Francophone countries in orange, and I saw a large swath of Africa covered in orange, and I wondered, why are people in Africa speaking French? And when I was doing my research in Côte d'Ivoire, you'll see, or maybe you saw a slide of some hunters. I was once accompanying a hunter in the middle of a forest. He was actually hunting. I was accompanying him, and he started to recite La Fontaine's fables of Aesop in French poetic meter, so to show how much of an influence that the French language and culture has had on West Africa. But being interested in Africa, as an undergraduate, I had a professor who worked in Burkina Faso, who was an anthropologist, Paul Reisman. And I had gone to school to be an archaeologist, but he so fascinated me that I decided I would be more interested in doing research with people above the ground who talked back rather than digging up people's remains. So I went to graduate school at the University of Virginia and decided to go to West Africa, Francophone West Africa, to do research, and went to the dean's office and asked for some summer funding to study Bambara, a Manding language spoken in Mali and other parts of West Africa. Got that money, went to Indiana University, and then later had a Fulbright grant to go to Africa. I then had a subsequent Fulbright grant to teach in Guinea, and ended up being the head of an international organization that brings European, North American, actually some South American and African scholars together who work in the Manding-speaking area of West Africa. So I can't help but do international research given the continent in which I specialize. Thanks.
Yeah, that's great. So each of our panelists has a very different scope of international research. For Rabier with LSI, you're working with this large center, creating collaborations, sometimes with NGOs. And so I would love to hear from you, what does that collaboration look like? Who are your collaborators and how do you keep that strong?
So our collaborators range from faculty on campus to faculty in other universities, university partners from other countries, to NGOs in the country, to for-profit and non-profit organizations that do international development work. It really is a very complex web of partners, but it's not that huge. So once you get in it, I guess you know everybody at that point really quickly. One of the challenges of doing international work, we get projects, fairly large projects, and in order to hire people in a country, you have to have a business in the country in order to do payroll, taxes, all kind of things. So that's a difficult thing because FSU cannot own a business in another country, so that makes it a little challenging. There are ways, that's how the international programs operate, but can't really do it for just 2-3 years of a grant and then leave. So that's why we partner with NGOs and others in the country to work and collaborate to build these international programs.
That's great. And Dr. Guo, for you, research, you have to do it internationally in your field, right? It's expected.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering what was that like for you getting started? Did you feel, okay, I'm ready to do this because that's what my field requires, or did it take some getting used to?
Oh, it takes time. I think this is probably, my experience could be useful for some junior faculties. Because at the very beginning, if you realize that your research requires collaboration with international researchers, naturally you would ask the question, how can I get connected with those researchers? It's hard, actually, especially when you are not recognized by other people. It's difficult. So what I did at the very beginning is I go for those meetings and try to chat with people. Even if I was not invited for a talk, I would present posters and try to follow up with others' talk, and then try to explain very carefully, very seriously my poster to the audience. So gradually, get to know the big names in the field, and then sometimes when I do research, when I produce result, I may communicate with those researchers via email. So we have some email communication, such and such, and then frequent chat at those meetings. And later, I think, as I mentioned, I organized this workshop and invited the people to all come over to FSU. I treat them very well indeed. It's a story. I wanted to cover all the expenses, because if you wanted to just ask people to fly over to this small place, normally they would say, no, I don't have time, I don't want to go and come over. But if you say, I cover your local expenses, especially for those invited speakers, I cover your flight, they probably will consider it. They want to see what this place look like. So a question I was facing is where to find the funds. So this is something I can share with probably junior faculty. I first contacted the NSF program manager for our field and mentioned this idea, and then successfully got a conference grant. It's not a big, 20K, something like that. But then I used this grant. I contacted our department chair, our college dean, and also office of vice president of research office. So they were very happy to match the NSF grant. So in the end, I got all the funds needed to support all the participants. And finally, we got a very successful workshop. We had over 60 speakers from various different countries. So since then, they know this place. They have a good impression about our lab. So later, we established a collaboration. More and more, the program becomes larger and larger. Now I think I can say probably with confidence, we are at the right front of this research field. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. And then Joseph, as an African anthropologist, you need to be in country doing your work. on the ground, and what for you does an international collaboration look like, and who are your collaborators? Because it's a very different world from LSI or from mechanical engineering.
I guess we sort of work from the ground up, as it were. I mean, I do ethnography, which involves, of course, speaking French, the national language, in most of the West African, well, in all the West African countries which I work, the former colonial language, also working in 3 different forms of Manding or Malenke, not all of which are always mutually intelligible. So it's sort of like learning the same language over again in a way, because all those varieties aren't different, are different. It involves eating different food, living in very different environments, from urban areas to villages, drinking water out of wells, going hunting. And my collaborators are members of 3 different social networks. An initiated association of hunters who are also healers and sorcerers who call themselves Dozo, who became an anti-crime force in Cote d'Ivoire at one point. I was there when that was happening. I had gone to study their song performances and ended up studying that. And then subsequently, when I was teaching on a Fulbright in Guinea, in French for the year at a university, I ended up learning about an association of healers who draw on an alphabet to write the Manding language in which I work, that he invented when he was selling Islamic literature in Cote d'Ivoire. He came from a long line of Arabists. And so I've been studying that language ever since, and it's the script and so on, which is quite complicated for a non-native speaker to learn. And then more recently, after an outbreak of homophobic violence in Cote d'Ivoire in 2014, I've been working with some NGOs of queer men and trans women. So, and in the context of leading this international network of researchers, I've organized 2 international conferences, created ties among different universities with which we have affiliates, and have started to send students, both graduate students and undergraduate students, to West Africa to conduct their own research, which overlaps with my own. So I just want to make a point there that I think graduate student research is crucial to our own. I may not have a laboratory. I presume that most people in the laboratory sciences expect that they will have graduate students contributing to their own research agendas. And I wish that FSU had an office where graduate students could go and ask for pre-fieldwork funding for a few $1,000s, language funding. You can't study Manding, you can't study any of the African languages that are spoken in the countries in which I work, normally in the United States, maybe at Indiana University, Yale, UCLA for a summer, but you really have to go there to be able to gain any fluency in these. And I was really lucky. Went to Dean Husky's office at the University of Virginia. What do you want to do? Here's what I want to do. How much does it cost? Here's how much it costs. Funded. I was off and running, and if it weren't for that, I probably wouldn't be speaking here today. So, thanks.
Yeah, I want to follow up with that too, for people who are just starting out as junior researchers in humanities, or even specifically anthropology. If we want to take it that route, what kind of advice would you give if they're going, okay, I need to travel to do my work, but maybe, is there a blueprint for this, for that discipline, or is it more, I have to figure it out myself?
Oh no, there are all sorts of grants and grant institutions that, I mean, I'm a social scientist by training, but I teach in a religious studies department, so I'm also, I guess you could say, a humanist. But the National Science Foundation has a cultural anthropology program for dissertation level research, for senior scholars. They have other specialized programs. The social science, which is only available to Americans, as I recall, but the Social Science Research Council is open to international researchers, regardless of their national origins. The Werner Grimm Foundation, a European organization, funds anthropological research. We also apply to grant agencies like the Spencer Foundation, which funds research on education globally. I just recently applied with a colleague at the École Militaire in Paris, the one in the shadow of the Eiffel Tower across the Champ de Mars, for a conservation, food, and health foundation grant. We were told that they're only funding currently funded projects, but we're going to continue to do that. mean, I'd be very happy to talk with anybody about funding in this area.
That's great. Yeah, thank you. So I'll check if anybody has any questions.
Oh, I think maybe,
Yes.
and I have also managed to get to West Africa for planning these international conferences that I was involved in. The
Okay.
Mande Studies Association funded me. And sorry, if I may, I'm taking up too
Feel
much
free.
time.
No, you're good.
But one thing I've gotten involved in is editing the association's journal. And the typical term for this these days is sort of north-south capacity building, as if the global north has all the capacity that we're bringing to the global south, an idea which I find, of course, ridiculous. I think one of the reasons that I'm involved in creating these networks is because I want to be able to bring, and through that association, I have brought scholars from West Africa to the United States, brought a colleague from Sweden to the United States to speak, brought my colleague Maxime Picard from the École Militaire in Paris to give the broad lecture here last year, and a collaboration has come out of that. But I think it's really important to bring voices from the non-Anglophone world, from the global south, into interactions, not just meeting people at conferences, but through this journal, which is a bilingual journal, Mande Studies, of which I'm co-editor, so that people who might not have an opportunity to publish in a venue that is listed on Project Muse and JSTOR can have a global audience reach their work in the language in which they write, which is, in this case, French, or English if they prefer. So, yeah, and I've also used just sometimes my own funds when a grant proposal doesn't work out, because living in a village in West Africa is not that expensive.
So sometimes you have to fund your own.
Yes, oh yes, yes, sometimes I have. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I wonder if we might have any comments from Dr. Bo or Rabia in response?
Yeah, I can add, I mean, I think NSI does these programs, it's mostly about lending technical expertise, lending a hand with technical expertise from here, but we're also learning overseas a lot of things where we can apply them here. And it's what's nice about doing this type of work is you're always helping in certain areas of needs of the now, and then making a small impact becomes such a huge difference for, for example, changing the curriculum in a country where all the kids are going to use from now moving forward. That's a huge change. If you help them kind of define that and walk them through the process of how to establish the needs and all of this. Example project we're doing now in Lebanon, where Lebanon is there's a huge economic crisis, but we're helping universities, 10 universities there, build career centers that are better connected with employers, so they can create a better value for the education, for the education the students having, so they can create different opportunities that currently aren't realized. And NSI doesn't always have that expertise. For example, career centers is not something NSI has done in the past. But we partner with a career center at FSU, and then some faculty from there to go and do that training, to do that mentoring, one-on-one with these universities. And that makes a huge difference, lending that expertise of those folks that have been doing it for so long. FSU's Career Center is one of the best as well, if you guys don't know. And then taking that expertise and just apply it. But we learn a lot too. That we're doing similar type of work and done similar type of work in the Philippines. We host a lot of folks coming in overseas. We actually have currently 24 folks from the Philippines, university administrators, university and college administrators, where they spend here 6 weeks. We take them on a tour, both an academic tour, but also a cultural tour. So they do visit Disney and other places as part of that process. But they're here to learn how do they improve their academic programs by seeing the Florida college and university system and how we do things to teach technical subjects, in different areas. For example, tourism, or other things. So education is not just what you see in a college of education. It's really more in a very broad term. And it's not only with our faculty that are employed in LSI the whole time. We've collaborated with, Zaina, for example, here. She's worked with LSI on different aspects with collaborated with dozens of faculty on campus. So collaborators, what I want to say is there is the operational aspect, I mentioned NGOs and others, but the technical expertise aspect, this is where we really depend on FSU's know-how. It's been wonderful being part of LSI's. LSI's success would not have been the same had it not been the openness of the faculty on campus and you know, want to be part of it. I don't think we've been told, no, I don't want to, on any proposal we're going after. And that's what makes it really, really cool.
Wow, that's great. Wayne, do you have anything to
Yeah,
add?
I could add a comment on how I feel this international collaboration is very important. As I conduct more and more international collaborative research, I gradually realized that this is important not only for my own research, but it also benefits FSU as a whole for several reasons, as I gradually realized. One, first, through this interaction, actually, people start to know this university, know this place. In the past, probably some of the researchers in other places, they don't know FSU. Although this is a very nice, very good top university, but they don't know it. However, through this interaction, they probably gradually know this place and they would like to even come over and visit this place. The second thing is through this interaction and collaborative work, you probably, for individual researcher, that probably is a better chance to, get a successful grant proposal funding, so that can bring in grant or funding, to FSU. And in my opinion, what's more important is probably, better attraction to student resource. A good example is I got one student recruited from a collaborator from Japan, from Osaka City. This student actually did an excellent job. Last year he was selected as Student Employee of the Year at FSU. He actually got 2 papers published in Physical Relative, which is arguably one of the best journals in general physics. So I feel like if there was no such collaboration, probably the student wouldn't even know this place, wouldn't even consider applying for FSU. So I would strongly encourage young faculty to consider establish collaboration, communicate with outside world, and then try to sell this place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's great. Yes, we have a question in the back.
Thank you so much for sharing this experience, which is very helpful. So I'm currently an assistant professor at the Department of Behavioral Health and Social Medicine and College of Medicine. Yeah. So I'm actually conducting an international project funded by the Department of Defense. So my project involves collaboration across 12 institutions across the world, including the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, and a lot of countries. Yeah. So basically, I feel it's for my project, it's the purpose to understand the neurobehavioral functioning of a rare disease. And the disease is rare, so it's difficult for any individual institution to have enough participants. So it's very important to pull together a large group of collaborators, so we could create a big data set to better understand the population. Yeah. But a challenge I found is because different countries, they have different administrative requirements in terms of like sharing data. And so I think for the first year of my project, I kind of spent a lot of time doing these administrative things, like establish the data sharing agreement and the server award and the handling like the invoice and all these things. So I wonder whether any of you have any like suggestions regarding how to facilitate basically the collaboration process, especially in terms of administrative part. I think many researchers are open for collaborating, and researcher, but all of us need to handle that part, which we are not that familiar with, you know? Yeah, thank you.
I don't have any specific thoughts, but I wonder, how do you do it here if you collaborate with other universities in the U.S.? How do you approach that if it was not international? Is there a way to do it in your field that works?
So I think, well, so there's a, so in this field about the study of this population, there's actually, so there's actually, so people start to establish a lot of international collaborations. So it's a trend. I think scholars tend to realize it's really need to like collaborate to be able to better understand this topic. So like I previously worked on the NIH, and we do have like also have a relatively good sample of longitudinal data on this population, and we actually recruit participants across the world. But well, still there's lots of research questions, logic gaps that are hard to address with the small sample size. So because any, like even for when I work on NIH, that's one of the largest study with in that topic. It's only have like about about 200 participants for that. So it's quite small in terms of if you want to have a real understanding of how like human beings with this type of disease develop from from very young age across the lifespan. So that's why my project aims to like combine lots of data sets across different institutions to hopefully create a bigger data set, so we can analyze like how it changed, their functioning change across the age.
Do you have an infrastructure here? Like, are you a single PI within this project, or do you have any staff who are helping, or postdocs who can help with that admin side, or is that the question, that there isn't an admin?
Yeah,
There's a gap.
I'm the single PI, but
Okay.
There's some staff on board given to some institutions, and I do have two postdocs working with me, and I'm also currently recruiting undergraduate researcher assistants to help me. So yeah, so we do have help, and because this is my first semester at FSU, so I
Welcome.
just transferred from University of Kentucky. So that's why I also just get started to learn about FSU, what's the infrastructure here to help. So yeah.
Well, I'd definitely like to hear what the panel has to say, but also Office of Research Development, where I work, and we have a few of our representatives here, that reach out to us before you leave. Let me make sure you have one of our cards, because we're here to help with some stuff. I can't promise everything, but just to see what's going on, and if there's a way we can help make it easier, definitely. But yeah, you're welcome.
I'm just wondering if you've contacted the embassies of the countries in which you're working. I mean, some embassies have really useful cultural affairs offices that might be able to facilitate whatever interactions you have with, internal review, board procedures that you have to go through in different countries and so on. And I also wonder, some cultural affairs offices in the U.S. embassies in the countries you're working with can have extremely useful and helpful people too. And I was also wondering about like the professional associations that you belong to. Sometimes there are sections, at least like the African Studies Association, for instance, that have different subsections that work in different regions or different countries. And so I wonder if there might be different sections in the professional organizations you're a member of that might be able to give you ties to people who would have the kind of expertise that could facilitate the hoops you have to jump through. And then it seems to me that if you would have the time and maybe some support from the Office of Research to write up a guide that, for other researchers who are following you, so that they're prepared to better face the kinds of challenges you're facing. I mean, you may be the person who's figuring this all out. Seems to me.
That's a great idea, yeah, thank you. We do plan to create like a kind of data repository, then we will share all the documents that we develop across the course, including like this type of the things, and also like data cleaning and analysis, like a syntax code. So we plan to share all this. So maybe future other people who want to do the similar kind of work can borrow. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, we've, one of the challenges I think also with data from collecting data in countries is often they don't like you to take that data out of the country. So that's a challenge we've faced when collecting data, any data from that country, or even building a website for them to use. You know, as simple as it is just a website for teachers to download resources, it's nothing fancy or collecting a lot of data, but it has to be in the country and all the data has to be there. This is very common across kind of the globe. To everybody's protecting their data to the extent like we do as well here. So it takes a lot of work internally. That's a great suggestion about contacting the embassies because they could sometimes guide you. Some other researchers might have done work there. But also the use of technology in one way could help with any data collection in general, where you could localize it, yet kind of standardize it too, so that you could possibly share it across with, you know, when you get approvals, you could share it, yet still somehow anonymous enough to not to meet the different standards and criteria of different countries. But then the data itself, more the technical part of the data itself, is standardized that you could share it, rather than you're collecting it in one way, someone else is collecting it in a different way, and there's no real standard for collecting data in that research. We do this a lot we study a lot of early grades reading and math for kids, and we collect tons of data using surveys or tools, or and we often have to compare some sets. We get regional projects rather than one country, and it becomes hard to compare data from one place to another without permission from everybody. So the challenges I imagine would be the same. Unfortunately, you'd have to go through country by country and work it out that way. But working with the ministry, with the embassy sounds like a great way to start.
Well, ministries too. Yeah.
And ministries, you have to eventually get to ministries. Maybe not the first step. Sometimes working with some ministries are very difficult. And then the embassy could walk you through some of that process and maybe facilitate some of that process.
Yes.
Could you talk, well, probably the panel, about your experience applying for funding from international sources? So is that process of both identifying and pursuing and then even receiving that funding different for, say, an international government as opposed to the US government, or an international NGO as opposed to a domestic foundation?
I can start. We rarely apply for grants that are funded from sources abroad, other than USAID funding sources, which the funding is issued to a certain office in a country. Then that office is making the funding decision, but still it's U.S. funding and not a foreign source of funding. So we don't have much of expertise other than the United Nations, maybe, if you count that, but it's still somehow all local to some extent. So I don't have much, I guess, experience in that area.
I can provide some information. I worked with two types of funding by now. The first is sort of a standard funding which probably through collaboration between funding agencies. Like we have a current ongoing collaborative project with a group in UK, Manchester. So there's a collaborative program by NSF at the United States and EPSRC at the UK, which is sort of equivalent funding agency in the UK. So those two funding agencies, they have a mutual agreement. So the two groups can apply together, submit one proposal, and then if the proposal gets funded, then the two funding agencies will separately support the two groups. And we can have travel, we can visit each other, and we can share data, such and such. So this is a very common type of funding I normally would pursue. For this type of funding, the administrative is actually very simple. It's just like a regular NSF grant, because all the administrative of the funding, is through NSF, through the university, in similar fashion. But I know there are some other researchers, they got grant, and some of the money needs to be sent to other countries, foreign countries. That will be very complicated. That probably will generate a lot of additional administrative barriers. But anyway, I have no experience with that type of funding. So the second type of funding I have some experience is essentially some sort of a visiting grant, which allow me to go to the collaborator site and stay there for some extended period of time. For instance, I once got a JSPS invitation grant from the Japan government, so I can go to Osaka and stay there for several months. And then also in UK, I got some sort of specific invitation grant, which from EPSRC, so which allowed me to stay in Manchester for several months. So there are such funding mechanisms which allow you to spend some time at foreign countries. But normally the application to those fundings require, first of all, you have communication with some local host. And then the application has to be together with the host or even through the host. Yeah. So that's my experience.
The question brings up some really bad memories, to be honest, that I've tried to repress, I guess. So I'm having to really rack my brain to remember the details. But I was involved with a colleague at the University of Sussex at their, I'm forgetting exactly the name of their School of Development Studies, but it's a great place. I attended a conference there. And he was applying to the the UK equivalent of USAID, which is referred to as DFID. That's the acronym. I think it's DFID. I can't remember what the acronym stands for, unfortunately. And we were applying for a grant to work on peace building among these hunters that I work with who had played an active role in the rebellion, and specifically in the western part of the country, an area I hadn't worked before. And so he wanted to collaborate with me. And so I had filled out my part of the application. We collaborated on the sort of overall structure of the grant and so on. And then he told me that I couldn't be involved because I wasn't a UK citizen, or I wasn't working in a UK institution. So all that work, and then that reply. So I'm not trying to be negative, but my experience has been pretty negative. And I was trying to get money to bring West African colleagues to a conference that this organization, Mandate Studies Association, had organized in Uppsala, Sweden, where a colleague works, because they don't have the funds to pay, and we couldn't fund everybody. And it's a place where people exchange their research, make new connections, potentially work on future grants. And so I contacted the Prince Kleis Foundation, which I believe is a Danish funding organization, or is it Dutch? They told me that they would fund the travel if they would only reimburse my West African colleagues, which basically meant that we had to find somebody to pay for their tickets. These are $1,000 tickets, and that was difficult. So these sorts of international relationships are extremely difficult, and the people who find themselves to be the most disadvantaged are people in the Global South, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think I lied earlier. I said I never worked on something, and then I remembered, while my colleagues here are talking, I remembered one incident. And it kind of reminded me, you know, why, it's somehow a little difficult because every funding organization has its own rules. You know, often we're not qualified to get funding from, let's say, the EU to do research here. Maybe there's funding, collaborative funding of some sort, like it's mentioned already, but it's hard for us. That's why we have our own NSF and our own organizations in the US funding us. There was a development project rather than a research, not a research project from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia that our team was working on for a couple years ago or so, and the idea there, they wanted to revamp their science curriculum in high school. They wanted to create different tracks, and they wanted someone to create the curriculum, train 30,000 teachers, and build labs across the whole country. So we have the LSI, part of LSI is the Florida Center for Research in STEM. We do a lot of STEM work, education work here in Florida. And we collaborated with Rice University included and a few other organizations, worked on the proposal for 2-3 months, gone through from one stage to another, and all we could hear is His Excellency, the Minister of Education, wants this done in a year and a half, which is impossible by any measure to do this whole project in a year and a half like this. Then His Excellency wanted this coming school year, then His Excellency wants, so it was really difficult because the process is not what we're used to. Where, you know, when we're writing a proposal here, you often have some leeway on defining some sort of a timeline, even if it's a development project. There are usually more reasonable things, and maybe sometimes politics play a role in defining harder timelines of some sort. I need this done by, you know, for election purposes or whatever. But it's not that fluid. The decisions aren't usually made by a single person, and that was the case in that case. And then the reality is, you cannot get the funding. A Saudi organization has to get the funding. So we were a partner on the project, and then we never 2-3 months working on this week after week, and then we never heard anything afterwards. So I still don't know what happened. But so I guess I forgot that whole experience. But that, you know, I guess I'm mentioning it to say is not every funding source is equally serious, especially on the international projects. You want to make sure you don't go too deep and waste your time before you actually vet the process. There are some countries where, you know, illegal methods for us could become part of the process, which you have to pay attention to that. Bribery and what I mean, I guess that's to clarify what by illegal. So there are different methods of, you know, grants are one thing, and then procurement is another. From our case, we bid on procurement and on grant award, so we could do a development project. Go train 10,000 teachers in Florida. That could be something we would actually apply for, but it's more of a contract rather than a grant per se. So it's okay for us as long as it's in our area of expertise, and then we can do it, and we're confident that we can do the scope within the budget and time that's given. In this case, we just had no clue. It was so fluid, and it was based on an individual who's making just ambitious goals, and then eventually, I haven't heard that someone else is doing it, so I don't know, the whole project maybe disappeared. So we wasted a good amount of effort on it, but lesson learned, I guess.
Yeah, no big lesson. So for those wanting to start international collaborations or look for international funding, are there some safeguards you'd suggest they have in place, or some warning signs to look for to help?
U.S. funding sources, I think, are the best funding sources. In our experience, there's plenty of opportunities through the U.S. funding sources. USAID is probably the biggest. But you can get also funding from NSF to do work, collaborative work with international partners. It doesn't have to have an equal match from somewhere else. They cannot be PIs on the project, but they can be collaborators on a project. Your research, you could do a study, let's say something you're doing it here and in Japan, you could probably still apply for funding from NSF to support that. The embassies, the US Department of State, they do have a lot of funding for different purposes, so that's, you're interested to do work in one specific country, build a relationship, see how you could cultivate it, but they do have funding programs. They're not usually as big as the USAID programs. USAID programs could be in hundreds of millions of dollars for one project. And so they're massive, big projects. The nice thing about them, they're collaborative projects. They're not, the US government is trying to do something in a country. It's the country that wants something done, and they apply for these funds, and then they have them. So it's also received better in a way. So we're doing work, for example, in Uzbekistan. We're working with the Ministry of Education, helping them out do things. It's things they needed help with, not things the US government felt they need help with. So kind of it makes a big difference of not you enforcing something, but kind of the collaboration is built in the way the funding works. So that's why we kind of primarily focus on those areas of funding from those sources.
Other comments?
Yeah, I have similar opinions. Essentially, I would recommend to first contact the program managers of US funding agencies, because like for the STEM field, quite often there are collaborative programs hosted by those funding agencies, like NSF. NSF actually has mutual agreement with a lot of funding agencies in different countries, in Japan, in Europe, in the UK. So if you identify those programs, then you can apply through those programs. That will minimize the risk, because a lot of the risk has already been resolved by the funding agency already. So that's something I wanted to suggest. And then, as I mentioned, the other type of grants or funding that I have experienced is there are some countries their government do provide some sort of program to invite scientists to come up. For those, I agree. I mean, we should be careful. You need to really identify appropriate programs. Not all the programs from all the countries are suitable. So that's one thing. And then you probably need to discuss with your local host. Really clarify all the details, whether there's any hurdles hidden behind.
Yeah, it sounds like ask questions first. And it seems to me it might be wise, listening to what my colleagues have been saying, to be developing a shadow proposal at the same time to a US agency with your collaborators' approval, so that there are two funding streams at once in case one doesn't work out. Or in any case for you as a US citizen.
And if I could add one more thing, I think the most of the international funding available for international work is not necessarily research focused. It's more kind of contracts and development focused. But don't let that steer you away from thinking, looking at these opportunities. We've done our largest research projects were done on development projects. And I'll speak to it from an education perspective, because that's what we do. For example, we've had projects to train thousands of teachers, but we want to know if the training is effective. We were doing a multi-year project, so we did randomized control trial on this study, the design a study on the professional development, see the effect of it, see how good is it. 2 years later, the study kept going. It's part of the evaluation if that works or it doesn't. So that you have the teachers there, you're doing the training already, you're paying everything done. So what's a few more surveys and some kind of videos and things of that nature. The cost is very trivial, but it often is well justified as part of an evaluation component on a project. So don't think that if you see a funding opportunity just for development, and I can't speak on every, I guess, technical area, you know, if you know, developing power plants, does that mean you can do research on, I don't know, but I'm giving you, I guess, my take, is look into it from that angle too. Don't just ignore it. Oh, this is not what I want. Sometimes you have to do something else in order to do what you want. I don't know if I said it that right, but a wise person once told me if you do 50% of what you like all the time, you're in a good job. So I kind of lowered it a little. 30% sounds good. But that actually lets you do, you know, it's okay to do the 30%. And that's what makes you, you know, excited. And then the 70% is really the cost of the 30%. It's okay, I'm still doing the 30%, better than what I was doing without all of this. And sometimes with collaborators, there are collaborators that would love that 70%, so you could focus on the 30%. So, you know, OPIs and other faculty and others are a good source of laying the things you don't want to do to.
That's great. Did you have other comments? I saw you writing.
I was just gonna, it seems like there are two kinds of international grants. Like, I was talking about the Social Science Research Council, which has an African Peace Building Network grant that my colleague Maxime Ricard and Paris and I are thinking about applying for. And then there are, and the SSRC is, I mean, I think it's based in the US, but it is a truly, people from any country can apply for it. But then there is, say, the French, is it Institute for Research and Development, the IRD, the ERD, and that is a French national funding agency. And I doubt I can apply for that unless I'm a collaborator with my colleague in France, whereas we could equally apply to the Social Science Research Council. So, and of course, that was the situation I was involved in with DFID. And I guess, you know, like my colleagues were saying, you ask the questions first and then find out if you're eligible. And I guess that's what I would have to do with the IRD when Maxime and I apply to them. But Social Science Research Council is open to either of us. We could both apply. So I think there are different kinds of international funding sources.
Your office would tell people read the RFP to start.
Yes, always read the RFP. Yes, yes, in the back.
Yeah, I have two very general questions. So first, I would like to know if, like, have cultural differences ever been a problem in a collaborative research? And if yes, how did you deal with that? And my second question is, if someone gets in touch with you wanting to collaborate, how do you normally proceed? How do you make a decision? Like, what, in other words, what are things that matter to you besides, like, the subject being interest? How do you decide to, yes, I want to collaborate with this person?
Okay. Those are great questions. So let me start with the latter one. Collaboration is usually often out of a need, and it's a need that I have, or I might not know that I have. So we are always having meetings and discussions with people that are interested in international development, or interested in STEM education, for example. We might not have something we can collaborate on today, but just, I might not be also thinking of what your area of expertise, and when I see funding for it, I might be ignoring it because it's not mine. But when I meet you and I know about you, then now I could, oh wait, that might be a good opportunity for us to collaborate. So I think establishing these partnerships, reaching out, building these relationships is I don't know, if I leave you just with one thing to do, it's just that. If nobody knows about what I do, I'm not going to have as many opportunities as I have if I have collaborators with me. So, so reach out, build those relationships, even if there is no funding involved. Don't wait until there is a grant opportunity to establish working relationship with others. Reality is it probably is too late. You know, an RFP comes out, the proposal is due in a month or two. How much are you going to work together to know each other very well? Versus if we've known each other, even if we haven't, but we've had time to kind of think about the potential collaboration, it always comes out a little bit better than that. What was your first question again? Sorry.
The first one was related to cultural
Cultural
differences. If that has ever
differences.
been a problem.
We have, not much for my involvement in international projects. I guess, I'm not originally from the US, so it makes it a little easier for me. I'm from Lebanon originally. My wife is from Peru. I studied in the US. I've worked in some other countries, so I guess through my upbringing, I've been a little bit more multicultural that way, so open a little bit to more. But we've had some incidents where we worked, for example, in Nigeria, in northern Nigeria, where Americans were being kidnapped and killed and all of that. When we were sending our team to go do teacher training, our team were being smuggled into the northern region in trunks and wearing different clothes, and just so they don't look as American as possible. So I think that comes with a big cultural shock, but also the risk of it all is added. So yeah, there are some projects that you might have to think of it, but in general, working with people, I would say that humans are more closer and similar to each other more than we actually think. And we often learn and develop friendships for life on these projects. I mentioned I have a project in Uzbekistan. There's a guy who I work with in the Ministry of Education. If he doesn't text me maybe 5 times a week or 6 times a week, there's something wrong. And he calls me his brother, and we've worked very briefly, but we've just kind of developed a good friendship. And then we are looking for other additional projects that goes beyond this that we're working in. So I've learned a lot about Uzbekistan just by visiting, but also through his eyes and his words, and it makes it a little different when you have someone from there telling you about their own country with passion. That makes a difference. It makes it closer, it makes it easier for you to go there, do the work you do. It makes it connections better. You know how to connect with teachers that you're working with, if those are your participants and such. So I don't think I speak on, at least from my experience and some of my colleagues, we have not felt strong cultural differences of some sort. I must say we've had a group from Pakistan come here, and the women that came they did one of these 6-week-long training projects, and the women that came here were all covered from head to toe, and then our cultural liaison person at ISI took them parasailing, wearing full gown. So them experiencing, I guess, our culture was probably a little different experience, but they've enjoyed it. We've had people that came to the US and they were maybe shy a little, but then when they saw how we do things here more freely and things, they tried us and said, this person taught me how to sing the whole time. I'm singing on the side of the sidewalk, and I'm not shy anymore, kind of thing. And these are adults, they're not kids. So it's often more positive if there is any of it than creates an impediment or a barrier or some sort.
Yeah, I think, Jorge, you asked a very good question. Cultural difference is a very good question. I had some experience, slightly different experience. When I first started working with my Japanese collaborator, they have very different views regarding relationship between advisors, students, collaborators, such and such. In the United States, we also have collaborations like we do a Parker Collider, Accelerator, those kind of things. We have groups from different universities. When we write a paper, normally we list all authors based on last name. But when the Japanese collaborator, they wrote a paper, They have completely different rules. So sometimes I think it's important to discuss all these issues at the very beginning, clarify everything. Generate a policy or a mutual agreement from the very beginning. And then I think what's important is respect each other's culture. Because I mean, they live in a totally different environment. They grow up in that way. You cannot force others to behave exactly like us. So show respect to each other. I think that's my experience. What's the second question?
If someone says, you receive an email saying that someone wants to collaborate with you, how do you
Okay.
decide, yes, I want to collaborate with this person?
Yeah,
He's already wearing my web shirt.
I know.
I know, I'm already. We can
Yeah.
collaborate already.
Yeah, this is also a very good question. My personal experience is I would first have some probably email communication or phone communication, or even check this person's research background and see if there's anything we can sort of benefit each other. Say if my research could be complementary to his or hers, or whether this people's research could be complementary to ours. I wanted to see whether there's a way to improve our research. If I feel like there's nothing I can contribute, I probably wouldn't continue the route, because it could be in the end a waste of time for both.
Have you ever said no to collaboration?
Oh, many. Well, the reason is a little bit special. I probably should put it this way. Our group, we developed some specialized technology for very low temperature cryogenic fluid visualization, which could find a lot of applications. So this is the reason why many groups, they approach us. But sometimes they approach us for some strange applications I completely have no idea. I don't feel this is relevant at all. So in that case, I probably have to say no, because honestly speaking, I don't have enough time to explore every possible direction, and so it's not possible, practical.
The rule of 24, what I call. You have so much time in the day. So.
I was just thinking of what Razuk said about having people already in your network, and if you can establish some sort of networked connection to the person who's asking for a collaboration, then I mean that's sort of the green light for me. And I think there has to be, at least for me, there's had to have been some sort of pivot where that person's interests overlap with my own. In the case of my British and French colleagues, it was the fact that they were interested in the role of this hunters network in the Ivorian civil wars of the early 2000s. So it was beyond my area in the Northwest. It was more in the center-western part of the country. But because these folks typically migrate for work farther south, or their fathers or grandfathers had and they grew up there, but they speak Manding still, that was a reason for me to be involved. So that's answering, I think, the second question first. Although I wanted to say, too, a related issue is in the journal that I help edit, we get a lot of manuscripts from colleagues in Francophone West Africa, and they tend, in terms of presenting their research, they tend to use a very different mode of presentation, which I think tends to come from development reports. And a lot of researchers get funded by development agencies to write rather standard, a kind of standard genre of presentation. So as an editor, I have, in a couple cases, become a co-author of research, because I have to translate their format into a more American or European format. Not that their format is necessarily bad, but it just wouldn't work in an academic or a US academic journal. So whether or not I'm the primary research, I've become involved in the research in a secondary capacity. And some of the cultural differences I have found, I was actually involved in a grant proposal with LSI that an organization in Washington, D.C. called Creative Associates contacted LSI to collaborate in a call for applications put forth by USAID to study extremism among youth in Ivory Coast and Cote d'Ivoire. And so I was asked to create a network of collaborators with the research institutions and universities I have affiliations with through the Mandate Studies Association. I did all that work. Then I found out there was an African researcher whom I'd never met who was involved in this. I had no idea, nobody ever showed me the call for applications from USAID. It was like giving stuff out into a void mediated by so many different levels. I really didn't know what to make of it. And in the end, LSI informed me that they didn't get the grant. I sent an email to Creative Associates asking why, never got an explanation. So sometimes the greatest cultural differences, I think, are in our own research context.
Yeah, often we don't get, USAID would not usually give you the kind of feedback like we would get from an NSF or other organizations.
But sometimes people have a sense.
And then now they changed their whole process completely different. They call it co-creation process. Your proposal is like 2-3 pages, and then you get a $50 million project, and you go actually create the scope of work with everybody involved. And sometimes that leads to a disaster process. Sometimes it works great. But every funding agency is very different.
Well, it would have been nice
It
to
would
have
have
heard
been
that
nice.
explanation at
Would
the
have
time,
been.
too.
Yeah, someone else probably won, and sometimes they might not award, they might just decide, it was a good try, we changed our mind, sorry.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, and thank you for the great questions from the audience as well, and thank you to our panel for your time and your great insight, and I think this was very helpful. If you want to continue the conversation, we're going to take a quick break for a reset and come back with Peggy Wright Cleveland and some amazing Fulbright scholars who are going to share about their experiences. So stay tuned for that. But for now, I'd just like to thank our panelists.
Thank you for organizing.